Until you use me up. Until you use me up. My brother.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our next session on consent-based siting. So, you often hear that people say things like environmental management isn't a very sexy topic. And I think that those folks should maybe use the acronym WIPWAC a little more, because that's a fantastic acronym that brings me joy every time we're talking about waste management. But what's really sexy right now is consent-based siting and trying to determine the path forward for the spent nuclear fuel and the high-level legacy waste around the country. So ECA has been incredibly fortunate lately. We have really been engaged by the Office of Nuclear Energy, which we greatly appreciate, on issues related to consent-based siting, which we've been engaged in for a long time. But we now have 2 new grants at ECA with the Office of Nuclear Energy, one which is building capacity in energy communities that are looking at either new nuclear development, waste, really anything related to the next phase of nuclear energy. And then we also recently were lucky enough to be awarded a $2 million grant under the consent-based siting initiative at the Office of Nuclear Energy. And we plan to use that money to help get funds out to communities via our own grant program, so that communities that have already done some work in this area and have direction to go have the resources to do that. So we're really appreciative of that. And today, to talk more about where the consent-based siting process is within the Department of Energy, we are fortunate to have someone who's been very supportive of our efforts, Dr. Erica Bickford. Erica is the Director of Integrated Waste Management in DOE's Office of Nuclear Energy, and she is helping to lead DOE's revived consent-based siting initiative. As I mentioned, we are just one of 13 awardees that received funding to help the department with this initiative and to facilitate dialogue around the potential for hosting a federal interim storage facility. We'll get to the other part in the Q&A. So the consortia are in the final stages of being set up, and we are looking forward to hearing how we're going to move forward. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Erica. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks very much for that introduction and the invitation to speak. Looks like nothing clears a room quite like talking about spent nuclear fuel management, but very thankful for those who are sticking around. As Kara said, I'm Erica Bickford. I'm the Director of the Office of Integrated Waste Management, and our task is to come up with solutions for storage and hopefully eventually disposal of our spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste inventories. So first, since this audience is kind of more oriented towards the defense waste cleanup, I wanted to provide some context for spent nuclear fuel in the US. So in this country, we started using commercial spent nuclear fuel in the 1950s. Today, as of last month, with Vogtle Unit 3 just coming online, we now have 93 operating commercial power reactors at 53 plants in 28 states. 20 plants have shut down, and those sites no longer have any operating reactors on them. And the inventory today of spent nuclear fuel is about 90,000 metric tons. If we extrapolate out from the existing nuclear power fleet through their assumed operating lifetimes through their existing licensing, we estimate about 140,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel for the total inventory. Now, that does not assume other new reactors coming online beyond Vogtle Units 3 and 4 at this time. And you may have heard that there is a lot of sort of interest in advanced reactors and small modular reactors and other technologies as well. So those may add to this inventory. Kara asked me to touch a little bit on reprocessing, which is, there's R&D on reprocessing that's done in another program within the Office of Nuclear Energy. However, there is always some conversation about reprocessing or recycling as a solution for the spent nuclear fuel inventory. There's those very much for it, those very much against it. There's non-proliferation concerns. It seems to be an ongoing conversation. Our office has done some analysis looking at what the potential is for reprocessing to impact that size of the inventory. And what that analysis has shown is that today we produce about 2,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel per year. And if, say, tomorrow we started recycling all of that, it would produce enough new uranium to fuel all of our existing reactor fleet through the end of their operating lifetimes without touching that 90,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel. So whether or not we move into recycling or reprocessing, which I'm totally neutral on, we still need some solution for the existing inventory we have of spent nuclear fuel, in addition to the high-level waste that we have as well. All right. So the Office of Nuclear Energy, of course, is very supportive of advancing nuclear technologies and nuclear power in this country, especially now as a solution for climate change by producing low emissions electricity and meeting what could be a growing demand for electricity in the coming decades. It's the department's responsibility under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act to manage and dispose of that spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste, which includes siting those facilities. And we do want to be clear that the spent nuclear fuel that's currently stored around the country is done so safely and securely. However, the communities that are hosting these facilities with spent nuclear fuel storage, including sites that have no longer any operating reactors, never consented to host those storage facilities of spent nuclear fuel indefinitely. And so it is important to us to find communities that are willing hosts and can reap some benefits from that hosting role. Our current consent-based siting activities were spurred with the Consolidated Appropriation Acts of 2021, which has continued for the past 3 years, where we were directed by Congress to pursue siting of a federal consolidated interim storage facility using a consent-based process. My office is the Office of Integrated Waste Management, and following that congressional direction, we established this mission statement to construct one or more federal interim storage facilities using a consent-based siting process, ready to receive commercial spent nuclear fuel as soon as practicable. You'll notice the as soon as practicable is there. That's our sort of federal program caveat, given that there's always dependency on federal authorization and resourcing, namely from Congress. Under our current authorization under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, we're operating under what's called the Monitored Retrievable Storage, or MRS provision, which we understand to be synonymous with interim storage. We can only get so far under that existing authorization. We can get up until the point where we can submit a license application, but we cannot currently construct and operate an interim storage facility. So we have ongoing discussions in the interagency and with congressional offices about what additional authorizations will be needed and when in order to fully execute this mission. So my office is the Office of Integrated Waste Management, and our vision for an integrated waste management system is illustrated in this graphic. We have spent nuclear fuel from the commercial nuclear power plants being transported to a federal interim storage facility. We cast that as one or more facilities. We're really flexible on that. There could be advantages to sort of geographic distribution or north, south, east, west, and providing some redundancy in the system. In this graphic, we have the DOE managed spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste going to a repository. That's our current operating plan. It's not set in stone. There is some flexibility in the system if a host community wanted a broader mission for hosting an interim storage facility. If they wanted to take additional materials from other DOE sites, then that is a possibility, but it's not the current focus of our program. And both streams eventually go to a geologic repository. We're not currently working on citing new sites for geologic repositories because our authorization right now is specific to interim storage, but we do continue to highlight that the end state for this material needs to be deep geologic disposal, and continue to highlight that we need to have action taken on that sooner than later. So why federal interim storage? This question comes up a lot. If a repository is the end state, then why do storage? Why not move towards a repository? And that's a fair question. Part of it is sort of unique facets of the US legislation and statutes. And part of it is just the time factor. The timeline to get to an operating repository is probably decades longer than it is to get to an interim storage facility. So at this time, we see interim storage as a really important component of that waste management system. It'll allow us to start removing that spent nuclear fuel from the nuclear power plants, hopefully rebuild trust and confidence with the public in the department's ability to fulfill its statutory responsibilities to manage this material. And one of the key economic elements is begin to address taxpayers' liability. If you're unaware, under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, the department entered into contracts with fuel owners or utilities to accept the spent nuclear fuel by the congressionally determined date of 1998. When that did not happen, those fuel owners began suing the department, and very successfully. Last year in 2022, the total lawsuit payouts from those activities amounted to $1 billion. Since 2004, the total amount of liabilities and judgments paid out is more than $10 billion. And those payments will continue indefinitely until the department fulfills its responsibility to accept that material. So when you look at the costs of that integrated waste management system, particularly the longer it takes you to get to a disposal capability, the more value added an interim storage capability has to mitigate those liabilities. The interim storage facility will also allow us to demonstrate, will provide some useful research opportunities, for example, in aging management, as well as allow us to demonstrate the transportation system for spent nuclear fuel, which some of us have been planning for decades. So that brings us to consent-based siting. This kind of comes from the 2012 Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future recommendations to the Secretary of Energy. After they did a 2-year effort analyzing sort of best practices and lessons learned from the US and internationally, they recommended a consent-based approach to siting both storage and disposal facilities. So in 2015, the department on its own launched a consent-based siting effort that was focused on both storage and disposal facilities. We conducted 9 public meetings around the country, put out requests for public comments, developed a draft consent-based siting process that was issued in 2017. Shortly after that, we had a change in administration, and the consent-based siting activities were discontinued for a period of time, and then they were restarted in 2021. So I'm pleased to announce that earlier this year, we released an update to our consent-based siting process. This version is focused specifically on interim storage, and that is because of the authorization that we have from Congress is specific to storage. This document builds on, as I mentioned, the 2012 Blue Ribbon Commission recommendations, the public input that we received from those earlier consent-based siting efforts, as well as the 2017 draft siting process. In 2021, we went out with a request for information to kind of gauge the state of play for consent-based siting, since we had taken a couple years off between the last effort, to see if opinions and thoughts had changed. And that provided some more kind of fresh input for this process. We've also looked at the US experience in siting nuclear facilities, both private and federal facilities, so WIP being one of the examples we've looked at, and the international experience, namely Canada and Sweden, who conducted voluntary public processes for siting nuclear waste disposal facilities with a high degree of public participation. So this is just a snapshot of how we've laid out our consent-based siting process. It's in 3 phases. We're currently in, or 3 stages, sorry. We're currently in stage 1. And this is, our objective with our consent-based siting process is to identify willing and informed host communities to host interim storage facilities. And we understand that the average American does not think about or engage with nuclear technology or spent nuclear fuel or any of the considerations for managing this material on their day-to-day basis. So we recognize that we need to put in the time and effort to provide that information to enable interested communities or citizens or stakeholder groups or others to get this information for themselves and decide if this is a process that they may want to be interested in participating in. So after our initial planning and capacity building phase, the next stage is seeking volunteers. So we plan to go out for a national call for volunteers to be considered for hosting a facility. And then there'll be a series of phases within that they'll move through. There'll be some initial siting criteria. We intend to make it very broad. We have more than 70 storage facilities for spent nuclear fuel already around the country. So there's a wide range of geologies and localities that are suitable for hosting these facilities. And we want to try and cast a wide net to start. Following that, there'll be more specific assessments of site suitability through the process. And then the third stage is negotiating a host agreement and then seeking a license for the facility and constructing and operating it. So just a closer look at the first stage that we're currently in. For the past couple years, we've conducted the planning. We stood up a team, hired in new people, got our sort of internal policy alignments, developed an approach, which included issuing the RFI, updating our consent-based siting process, and going out with a funding opportunity. And that funding opportunity was based on feedback that we had received through our RFI and other public comment opportunities, that in order for members of the public or states or tribes or others to effectively engage with the department, resources needed to be provided to support that engagement. So now we're in that phase 1B where we are building capacity, engaging with those awardees that Kara mentioned. ECA is one of, and we're very happy to have them. We plan to conduct robust public outreach and engagement, both with our awardees and separately from it, really support a mutual learning opportunity. We have a vision for how we think this system will operate and what a community may be interested in and concerned about, but we also know that we don't know everything, and we want to hear from others on their perspectives. We expect through this that we could refine the consent-based siting process based on the feedback that we get. Again, based on lessons learned from other processes, it's best to be adaptable and flexible. So we plan to learn as we go and adjust as needed. I also want to be very clear, because there's been a lot of confusion in a wide variety of audiences, including the media. At this stage of consent-based siting, we are not yet looking for volunteers. The awardees, like ECA from our consent-based siting funding opportunity, are supporting this mutual learning and capacity building phase. They may or may not be considering wanting to host a facility later on. They may be related, but they are not definitively related. Seeking volunteers will come later in the process. So luckily, we were able to have Secretary Granholm help us out in announcing our awardees earlier this summer. She did that with Congressman Levin at the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station in Southern California. We selected 13 awardees with a total amount of funding of $26 million. One of our goals for this funding opportunity announcement to support consent-based siting was having geographic and institutional diversity. We wanted a wide variety of perspectives to inform our approach, and we're happy to report that we did achieve that goal. This map shows the distribution of both the primary awardees and the partners that have been identified to date. We expect this to be updated as some of the awardees continue to identify partners. Our approach to consent-based siting using this funding opportunity is intended to serve in many roles. One is a force multiplier. In consulting with our Canadian colleagues, when they embarked on their, they don't call it consent-based siting, but their voluntary siting process, they had kitchen table conversations with upwards of 10,000 people in their country. That's a significant portion of their population. For us to do something comparable, we would need an army of people, which we do not have. We have 6 focused on consent-based siting right now. So part of the thinking in this approach was for the awardees to serve as a force multiplier, to extend our reach out beyond sort of the usual audiences that we engage with, and be able to share information and bring information back to us as well. We also wanted to use this mechanism as a way to reduce barriers for participation. For those who have ever applied for and managed federal grants or cooperative agreements, it's not a trivial process. And for those, especially communities or smaller interest groups, may just not have the in-house capability. And so part of this mechanism allows for sub-grants to be made from the primary awardees to other interested groups who want to participate in the process. And so that really widens the field of folks who are able to engage with us. And another goal that we have is to allow for cohort development or what we call capacity building. I mentioned earlier that in the United States, the average American generally is not well versed on issues related to nuclear waste management, spent nuclear fuel, nuclear technology, or any of the above. We have a couple of very fervent organizations, including ECA and others like the Nuclear Waste Strategy Coalition, that are active on these issues. But it's not like there's a big groundswell out there of folks talking about spent nuclear fuel management day in and day out, or advocating to policymakers about this issue. So one of our goals is to kind of elevate those voices that are able to engage in the discussion, especially in those policy discussions or in programmatic discussions, and really engage knowledgeably on this issue. So that's where we're at in stage one. Next stages, we move to stage 2 and stage 3. Stage 2 is estimated to be in about 2 to 3 years, but as I said, we intend to be flexible. If the feedback we get from this first stage, the cooperative agreements under that consent-based siting consortia funding opportunity are expected to operate for about 2 years. Those awards are just being placed now, and some of them are just starting work. If during the course of that 2 years we get significant input or feedback that we need to spend more time in stage 1 or add a new stage between stage 1 and stage 2, we'll absolutely do that. We don't want to rush this. You only get so many bites at the apple in terms of trying to successfully site nuclear waste management facilities, so we want to do it in the most robust way that we possibly can. And that's the end of my remarks, and happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Erica. So maybe I'll just start firing them at you from your right. But I encourage everybody, if you have a question for Erica, please come up to one of the mics that are over there and over there. So the first question is, in order for us to really get to a geologic repository and beyond where you're going with the federal interim storage facility, there's going to have to be an opening of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act and an amending of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which is a heavy, heavy lift. And we used to have champions in Congress like Alexander, Murkowski. How would you suggest that groups like ours, understanding the limitations that you have as the Department of Energy, pushing on Congress, what insight would you give for people who are trying to put some urgency behind this up on the Hill?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're absolutely right. I mentioned that we need new congressional authorization to construct and operate an interim storage facility, but beyond that, to get to the disposal stage, we additionally need even broader authorizations. Within the department, we have mechanisms for briefing members of Congress, as well as for developing and submitting legislative proposals through a very long chain of review. And so we utilize those avenues to the extent that we can. We also try and make ourselves just, enthusiastically available to members of Congress to talk to them about this issue, with varying degrees of response. I'm pleased to say that we had some discussions last week that indicated sort of new interest in briefing some senators on this issue. So that gives us a little bit of signs of life. But you're absolutely right. Previously, there were champions in the Senate on this issue that introduced legislation, though even then, none of that legislation ever made it out of committee. We recently got in the Office of Nuclear Energy a new chief of staff who comes to us from the Energy and Natural Resources Committee and had worked on past proposals. He's optimistic that we may see some legislation introduced this fall from Senator Manchin, but try not to put all your eggs in one basket. So I think in general, as many voices contributing to this conversation as possible, because as the department, we'll continue to talk about it, but one, we're a federal agency, and we're a program within a federal agency that has many competing interests, all requiring dollars and authorizations. So I think the more voices from a wide variety of geographies and interests that can contribute to this discussion, the better.
Great. And actually, continuing down that road, that thought, we've had a few fits and starts dealing with this issue. So what are you all doing now to try and institutionalize the consent-based siting approach so that if there are political changes, I hear they happen, how are we going to institutionalize this so we don't keep starting down the same path?
Yeah, absolutely. Durability of process is a key aspect that we've identified as a potential risk to the program. We've been doing a lot recently in knowledge management. looking at the history of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act and the Yucca Mountain siting process and the short-lived second repository siting process and the short-lived Office of the Nuclear Waste Negotiator and the monitored retrievable storage siting process, and trying to learn what we can from those. Some of the collective wisdom from the Yucca Mountain experience is that there was a well laid out process where they characterized a number of sites, whittled it down to 3, and were supposed to continue scientifically evaluating those sites. And then the Amendments Act of 1987 shortcut that process and selected one of the 3 in an effort to reduce this schedule and cost of the project. 30 years later, we can see that that objective was not realized. And so one of the takeaways we have from that is when you establish a process, stick to that process. That said, when you're operating, so when we started consent-based siting back in 2015, that was a departmental-led effort, which makes it very risky to be discontinued with a change in leadership and administration, as we saw. This time around, we do have congressional authorization and what appears to be bipartisan support, so that makes it a little bit more robust. That said, it's still just a couple of paragraphs in annual omnibus appropriations, not a revision to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. So for long-term durability, you do need some more durable form of authorizing legislation. And we've been communicating that to members' offices that we engage with, that we have a concern that when we get to the point in our consent-based siting process where we want to seek volunteers, the willingness to engage with us without some more certainty that we have authorization to see this through and fulfill our commitments in the consent-based siting process will likely create a significant risk of failure of the program. So we are communicating those points forward, but we certainly welcome any support that anyone else would want to provide us.
Seth?
Oh, great. A couple of different things. So one is there was a ruling, obviously, last week or 2 weeks ago on the Fifth Circuit that basically puts into doubt whether NRC can license a private facility. Obviously, consent-based siting's looking at federal facilities. As part of that ruling, one of the big pieces was, hey, DOE, you can maybe take some of this waste at a federal site as long as it's for an active facility, an active operating reactor versus the closed reactors. How has your office kind of looked at that, and what are you all thinking around that for the consent-based siting?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a fresh off the headlines event in spent nuclear fuels facility siting. We did have our Office of General Counsel take a look at that ruling and give us some feedback, and their assessment was that that ruling was specifically directed at private companies pursuing those licenses, and that it would not affect anything that we are currently doing with consent-based siting. That said, that ruling from the Fifth Circuit, to my understanding, directly contradicts previous rulings from the 10th Circuit. Right. And just from the media coverage of this, there seems to be some confidence that it may be overturned should it go to the Supreme Court. So it's a little bit, to be continued on that one.
Good morning. My name is Dan Ogg, Executive Director of the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board. Good morning, Erica. Thank you for your presentation. I have a hard question for you.
Okay.
This regards fiscal 24 appropriations bills up on the Hill. They're draft at this time, of course, but on the House side for your office, I believe they have a number of $18 million where you requested $53 million with no other specifics. And on the Senate side, they've matched your request at $53 million, but they included a large amount of very specific language about how you should run your program. So with those very two different positions, my question for you is, has your office engaged, or do you plan to engage in any way with the House and the Senate to try to help resolve those differences?
Yes, the short answer is yes. Yeah, Dan's absolutely right. So currently in the draft appropriations, the House has us at 18 million, and the Senate has us at 53. So at At 18 million, that would cause significant difficulty for our ability to continue on our current path and timescale. We'd really have to scale back many of our activities. That said, I'm pleased to say that the department authorized us to plan for a starting spend rate of $30 million this year. So that tells us that there's some confidence within the department that we will end up closer to that $53 million mark. Because in years past, we've been limited to whatever the lower funding level is, which is challenging. It's challenging to start the year at a low funding level and then get your funding halfway through and then have, twice as much money that you're expected to spend in 6 months. But that's part of the broader challenge of year-to-year funding uncertainty. To do a large capital project like implementing a federal interim storage facility, it's in terms of keeping the schedule and keeping costs efficient, having to wait every year to guess what you're going to get, and especially not have it at the beginning of the fiscal year on a reliable basis, really challenges the program. In terms of talking with members' offices, we absolutely do. Whenever they reach out and ask us, we are always available to speak with them. We've talked to some House offices, we've talked to some Senate offices, specifically about that legislation that's in, and that's been in the draft bill for a couple of years, and then it gets removed before it goes to final. We did share recently that while we appreciate the authorization that language would provide in allowing us to construct and operate an interim storage facility, some of the specificity with which it defines consent does not match our vision. We want to be very flexible, understanding that consent could mean different things to different communities, and we want to work through this process to get feedback on what that could look like, rather than have it be a top-down approach.
Hi, Erica. Wayne Barber, reporter with the Exchange Monitor. I wondered where the department is, how close the department is to appointing a new Deputy Assistant Secretary for Spent Fuel and Waste Disposal.
I'm told it's in process. I've been told any day now, and that was months ago, so it's working its way through the system.
Hey, Kara. Hi, Erica. Christine Gellis, Long & Necker and Associates. First off, thank you for your presentation, and I've been just very impressed with your composure in response to this. So it's good to meet your acquaintance. My question, well, actually, Kara's comment anticipated one of my questions, and I was thinking the fits and starts. I liked your answer about the durability of the program. I didn't love the aspect of if a willing community were to step up, maybe we capitalize on that rather than wait for this 10-year process to play out. Because we could miss opportunities, social acceptability changes so frequently. Mm-hmm. And what occurred to me, but I also understand your position of why you follow the process, and the lesson learned of Yucca Mountain is a great example, mm-hmm. right? So I check on everything you say. Is there a need for Congress to form a caucus on this issue? And I don't mean it to interfere with the cleanup caucus, because to me it's a fundamentally distinct thing, something that brings to bear the burden on the taxpayer, the fact that we're paying money to do nothing, and just to re-educate everybody, a constituency that's such a broader map than even the DOE sites, right? That just says, this stuff exists, right? And gives you the permanence and sort of that continuing support you can rely on, irrespective of what happens in congressional elections.
Sure, that's a great idea, and I'm pleased to tell you that there is a caucus on the House side on spent nuclear fuel management that's chaired by Congressman Levin from Southern California and Congressman Fleischman from the Oak Ridge area.
That's awesome.
So they have been reasonably active. I know Dr. Huff met with them earlier this summer. Dr. Huff's the Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy. They had some follow-up questions for us, which we responded to. That caucus has not included any members from the Senate thus far. We're in parallel pursuing a separate strategy with the Senate to brief some of their new members, because some of the committee staff came to us and said, most of their current members have never taken a vote on nuclear waste policy or issues and just aren't engaged on it. So if they are going to consider introducing new legislation or funding the interim storage facility or what have you, they've asked us to support briefings to those members. And again, we enthusiastically said, yes, please ask us. We would. Is
there anything we can do, ECA and others, to sort of encourage the full fruition of that?
I'd say the more people talking about this issue and the need for action on this issue, the better chances of success. When DOE is the only voice in the room, I think it doesn't carry as much weight as it does when there's many, many voices.
ECA was invited, Christine, to do a briefing of our issues for Senator Levin and the community engagement folks that they've been working for. It was a couple of years ago. But I mean, just following on from what you've said, it feels like what Levin and the House Cleanup Caucus is really focused on is spent nuclear fuel. And selfishly, given ECA's membership, I question a little bit how, if we're at the beginning of educating people who have not voted on spent nuclear fuel or nuclear waste before, how do we provide urgency around legacy waste at the same time that everybody is worried about the spent nuclear fuel? Because, as you said in your opening remarks, those communities like Zion in Illinois did not choose to be, de facto interim storage sites, nor did, some of the folks around. Hanford, anywhere, Idaho, they too have waste. And I don't hear as many technical experts say all the legacy high-level waste is stored safely where it is.
And that's the absolute great point. Another concern that we've heard is, once you have the interim storage facility, because some of the members, including the Spent Nuclear Fuel Solutions Caucus, are focused on getting spent nuclear fuel out of their districts. So say you execute the consolidated interim storage facility and are able to move the spent nuclear fuel to a storage facility, where do the voices come from in terms of the next step that's needed to move to disposal? Have you just reduced your 28 states storing spent nuclear fuel to 1 or 2? And where does that leave you in terms of getting over that final hurdle of a disposal facility?
And obviously whether those communities would want to take the chance that there's not necessarily linkage between interim and permanent.
The linkage between disposal and storage is an ongoing conversation, because on the one hand, the current linkage in the Nuclear Waste Policy Act does not allow us to construct and operate a facility without a construction license for Yucca Mountain, which is not expected to occur. That said, you don't want to You want to make sure that you include in the system some pressure to continue moving forward on disposal. And our vision of that is, through the consent-based siting process, having negotiated agreements with the host communities could include a time limitation, that this facility can operate for this period of time, and then the government needs to move it to a disposal facility. Now, practically speaking, every time the government misses its deadlines, it's just sort of a payment system. And so that's possibly how that would look. But I think there's a point where those payments could become, comparably expensive to what it would cost you to just move forward on a repository, or more so. So I think, potentially the economic message may be the most effective, at least for spent nuclear fuel, talking about the liabilities, 10 billion taxpayer dollars, that does not come from the Nuclear Waste Fund, that is taxpayer dollars, you, me, and everybody in this room, is paying for the spent nuclear fuel to stay where it is on site, and for that program, for that situation to continue in perpetuity, which as a citizen and a taxpayer is not what I think is the best use of those resources. When comparably for a similar or less amount of money, you could have an interim storage facility.
Casper? Kara, do you want to wrap? It's getting close. I'm happy to step down if you don't want to take a last question.
I have 7 minutes and 26 seconds.
But
or
is that a lie?
I don't know.
I think that's a lie.
Oh, wow, 2 minutes. No, please, Mayor Casper.
Erica, it's good to meet you. My name is Rebecca Casper. I serve as the mayor of the city of Idaho Falls. And Idaho Falls just very recently hosted the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board for one of their meetings. And there, many of your team members presented. And as I listened with a lot of interest to the discussion about social science being part of the plan going forward. And I am a political scientist by training, and poli-sci is one of the social sciences, and the social sciences are so incredibly diverse. People in the room here might be thinking, hey lady, civil engineering and electrical engineering and nuclear engineering are very diverse, and they all have the same engineering title. Well, in the social sciences, you have geography and psychology and anthropology and lots of different disciplines. And your team, I think, has an anthropologist, it has a behavioral psychologist, and it has a geographer.
Human geographer, yeah.
Yeah, and that's great, but you don't have a political person there. And as I was listening, I was hearing a lot of interesting conversation around social justice, environmental justice, and I understand how important those themes are, and we never want to take advantage of any population or group of Americans as we have this conversation about siting. However, one of the lessons learned from Yucca Mountain is not that local government failed to represent itself. It's that federalism is a key feature of the American political landscape, and you can't solve for that with social sciences unless you rewrite the Constitution, right? And so as I was hearing all of those presentations, none of them really solved for how you educate states to be have this conversation responsibly. But I did hear an awful lot about, well, we're going to talk to planners, and we're going to talk to law enforcement and first responders, and we're going to talk to different subpopulations. And as I'm listening to that, I'm thinking, well, planners work for local government. Law enforcement and first responders work for local government. So many of the entities that the plans are to speak to are part of local government. And I guess I don't want to see a process come forward from this really erudite team that you have that completely supplants local government, takes us out of the loop. Rather, I'd like to see, because this is a conversation that's been going on for such a long time now, many members of Congress probably don't have the full education on it. I'd rather see an education-based process that educates members of Congress, educates local government, and educates state government, rather than pulling us out of the loop. And so I wanted to share that as a comment and see if you had any thoughts on this. I'm not trying to be a rabble-rouser. I want to be part of the team that helps to bring this forward, but we're
happy to have
very
you.
Concerned about.
Thanks so much for your feedback. That's great feedback. And just to be clear, we're absolutely have no intention of keeping local governments or governments at any level out of the process. We do want to be mindful at this stage to not appear to be focusing on any localities. And so a lot of our engagement is more at national or regional level organizations to provide information. So, we've gotten some questions of why don't you just start talking to governors? Well, the lesson learned we took from the 1990s monitored retrievable storage effort, where 50 letters were sent to 50 governors asking if they wanted to host a facility and they got 50 no's, is maybe that's not the most, that's not the place where you start. Maybe you build up to that. And we have long-running cooperative agreements with state regional groups to focus on transportation, but we of course engage them on our broader processes. Some of those include legislators, so the Council of State Governments Midwest, for example. And we're trying to engage more in other organizations that we haven't had sort of long-running partnerships with, the Council of Mayors or the Council of Regional Planners or counties and things like that. We did reach out to, I believe, the National Council of Mayors to participate in their meeting last year and got a no thank you. So we'll knock on all the doors that we can knock on and try to find ways to put ourselves in there. But if you have any connections, we'd be happy to leverage those. But yeah, we certainly recognize that at local levels, at county levels, at regional levels, at state levels, legislatures, all across the board, we need to be sharing information. We're also have a connection with Idaho National Lab is kind of spearheading this GAIN program where they're talking to state legislatures about focus on nuclear reactor power development. And so we are having some interactions with those activities because they're also hearing questions about the back end of the fuel cycle. So we're collecting information that way as well and inputting that into our strategic plans for outreach. I see we just got into yellow.
Yes, one last quick
I
question.
just have a quick question. So since I've been here, a lot of folks keep talking about education, training, and to piggyback off the previous question, who exactly is writing all this down? Like, once we have all these policies, these great ideas, how we're going to get the workforce to commit to do these particular functions. And Mr. Avery made a good point in his previous briefing about we go from tiers, we go from here, we bring it down, and we go further down. Who exactly is writing all this down, capturing it to tell us how exactly we're supposed to get the mission done? Thank you.
Okay. I can't speak for the EM programs, which was the focus of the prior panel, but for our program, we document our approach in our consent-based siting process on the specifics of sharing information and doing public information sharing and outreach. We're partnering with our consent-based siting consortia to do that, and we are anticipating them to provide us with feedback on their lessons learned, best practices, and recommendations. So for our process, our consent-based siting process, we are engaging in mutual learning now, building our own understanding of what methods we think can be successful based on lessons learned and best practices from the US and internationally, as well as engaging with our consent-based siting funding opportunity awardee partners for them to provide us with that information as well. And that will inform how we move on to the next phase.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being here. Two quick things is one, ECA, as we've been working on both new nuclear development and the waste side for a holistic approach, we've actually created a new membership category for any community that is looking at hosting nuclear facilities. It does not have to be somebody hosting a DOE facility or a federal facility. So for anybody out there who's heard heaps of interest from communities, by all means, send them our way. And then talking about the back end of the fuel cycle and interest that we hear a lot about recycling and reprocessing, ECA is going to be hosting a webinar that will be open to the public on recycling and reprocessing on September 28th. So keep your eyes peeled for more information on that. And I guess I will just wrap up by saying thank you so much for coming, Erica. We really appreciate the information.